one. Okay, so the talk this year is similar to the theme that I've given previous years. What I like to do is try to present some of the science that people are doing at Livermore using MVAPICH, because I like how that sort of completes the cycle, so that people who are working on MVAPICH can see what impact their work has, right? So came up with this title, How a Bunch of Buckeyes Crack Tough Nuts, which I thought was clever, and then my girlfriend pointed out that maybe not everybody knows what crack tough nuts means. So let me define that. So here I've got a play on words, right? Crack tough nuts. What I mean by that is, tough nut to crack. If you look up on Wiktionary, there's a few definitions there. The one I want to use is this first one here, which is a problem that is challenging to solve, right? So it's a hard problem. So you can think of this or that in terms of science, right? And that's what we're trying to do. As I got to thinking about it, then I thought, maybe some people don't know what crack tough nuts means, but there might be just as many who don't know what a Buckeye is. So I probably should define that too. So people if you're not from Ohio, this is the state tree of Ohio. This is the Ohio Buckeye. Sort of looks like that, but in 3 dimensions. Right? This is a fruit that grows on the tree and a husk. They will drop out usually around October, September. You find these all over the ground. They look like this, and this is your Buckeye nut. Right? So there's a Buckeye tree, a Buckeye nut. The nut really is no good for anything. You can't eat it. It's toxic if you eat too many of them. So instead what people do is they drill holes through them and they create necklaces, which you just wear around your neck. You might see these in the airport. The other thing that people will do is they create candy. So these candies are chocolate and peanut butter. Of course, if you're allergic to peanut butter, these are also toxic to your health. So not much better. So we've got a tree, a nut, and candy, but that's not all that a Buckeye is, right? So also the mascot of Ohio State University, Brutus, is a Buckeye. When I was looking this up, I found this really neat article that shows the costumes that Brutus has worn through the years, right? And so it's gone through this neat progression. So 1965, you had this pretty top-heavy fiberglass-looking thing, right? I guess it kind of looks like a nut, but you wouldn't want to fall over in that. You'd never get it back up, right? 1975, they switched to a mask, but that was just really scary, so that didn't last long. They went back to this top-heavy thing in 1980, and then finally in 81, they get around to something that looks sort of like what we love and know today in Brutus. In the same article, I didn't realize there was, I'd had some of the people who have played Brutus over the years, and I didn't know this, but the year after I graduated, there was somebody that I recognized who was a Brutus mascot. And so it kind of caught me by surprise until I scrolled down on the page a little bit, and I thought, nah, there's no way. And then there was this other picture, and I thought, yep, okay, I'm convinced. So we've got the tree, the nut, the candy, and the mascot, but that's still not all that a Buckeye is, right? So really it also refers to anybody from the state of Ohio, and in particular people that go to Ohio State University, right, including current students and past. And one particular group is the Now Lab, right? So this is your group of Buckeyes. The Now Lab, one of the things they produce is MVAPICH, and then scientists all over the world use MVAPICH to solve hard science problems, right? And so this is the connection I'm trying to make. So this is the bunch of Buckeyes solving hard problems, cracking tough nuts, right? And so in the spirit of mascots, I kind of think Now Lab should have a mascot. And so my recommendation is that you guys should be the Now Lab Nutcrackers. Right? Okay, so with that, who is Livermore? So Livermore is a pretty big lab. It's a Department of Energy lab. We have about 7,000 employees or so. We're out near Oakland, California. It's 1 square mile, so 1 mile by 1 mile. These are the state admissions of the lab. So there's eight sort of broad categories everything falls into: biosecurity, counterterrorism, defense, energy, intelligence, non-proliferation, science, and weapons. Right? So a common thread through all of this work is that we do a lot of work on computers, a lot of simulations, and so we have a lot of supercomputer systems. This is the current picture of all of our clusters. These are colored by sort of the purpose of the machine. So the sort of orangish, darkish orange are what we call the capability machines. So these are where our large jobs run. The lighter orange are the capacity clusters. These are more for throughput, right? The blue machines here are for viz clusters. These, up until recently, were the only ones we had GPUs on. And then the green ones are serial clusters, right? And if you recolor this graph based on where we run MVAPICH, it looks more like this. So we've colored all the machines scarlet where they're running MVAPICH as the default MPI library. So that's the vast majority of our systems, and it's also the vast majority of where our users run and where a lot of the science gets done. There's a couple of machines in here which are white, but scarlet text. These are our new Coral EA systems. These are the open power with NVIDIA plus Quadrix, or sorry, not Quadrix, but Mellanox that we would like to get MVAPICH running on. Right? It's not there yet. So why do we have MVAPICH? This list is on an old slide. This has got a lot of historic reasons on it. The two that I would really like to highlight here is that one, we have good communication and ties with Ohio State on this, right? So we really appreciate how quickly the team responds to problems that we have. So whether it's fixes that we need or performance improvements, new algorithms, the team is very responsive. So having that service has always been important in a production environment. And the second most important reason is that it's still often the fastest for a lot of our users, right? So those two are the key reasons. So let me now get into some of the science that Livermore scientists are doing with MVAPICH, right? So first of all, climate change. The lab does a whole lot of climate change research. We have a number of researchers that are looking at this. For these simulations, you have to simulate the whole globe. You simulate hundreds of years into the future, and then you do that over and over and over again because you have to average the results to come up with some estimate, right? So it takes a lot of computation. But these are important results, right? So these results now affect not only global political decisions, but also regional decisions. For example, in California, they use it to study regional areas within California. California gets a lot of its water from the snowpack. And so if you have a bunch of dry years and you don't get much rain through the winter, you're going to run short of water through the year. So the regions in California use this information for planning on how they distribute the water and aquifers they build out and those kind of things, right? This eventually boils all the way up to the highest levels of politics. So people, at the presidential level will see reports coming out of Livermore and make decisions based on climate for that reason. So these really have worldwide impact for these results. And all this work is done with MVAPICH, right? So another area, carbon capture. So people trying to build systems that will capture the carbon dioxide coming out of, say, coal or natural gas power plants. It's hard to do this, and at scale, you don't know if the technology you have is going to work. You only get so many pilot programs to actually test it, and it's expensive, right? And so there's value in being able to simulate the technology to make sure that it can scale up before you actually put it onto a power plant and try it. And so this is just recent work. This won an R&D 100 award last year, but some Livermore scientists were working with a larger group to develop this system where people can use simulations to test carbon capture technologies before they try them out. Right, this is now open for people to try. Another one is rare earth elements, right? So these rare earth elements are not necessarily rare, but the mines where they're collected are 95% of the material comes from outside the United States in some cases. In other cases, some of the material is just affected widely by market swings. And so one of the things people are trying to do is figure out what substitute materials can you use, what substitute elements can you use in these materials that are needed for clean energy, right? So building magnets, wind turbines, brakes on your hybrid car. People are looking at maybe substituting iron in for cobalt. Cobalt's very expensive, right? And you have to simulate this to see sort of what quality of material you end up with when you do that work. Again, this is all done with MVAPICH. Some recent work in additive manufacturing. So people are trying to do 3D printing with carbon fiber. Carbon fiber has a lot of neat properties, but often the way people produce it is they put it into a mold and press it together And so you get fibers that are kind of going all in different directions, right? And in order to get the properties you want, you have to press enough material, enough carbon together so that you have enough fibers aligned the direction you want, right? If you can line them up intentionally, you can get by with using less carbon fiber and end up with a stronger, lighter weight material. So people are doing simulations where they're actually sending this through a, it's not an inkjet printer, but you can imagine it's a 3D printer. They're actually injecting these carbon fibers through the nozzle, right? And they have to make sure that everything lines up as it goes through, or otherwise you clog the nozzle. So again, there's more simulation work. Cancer research. So this is a big new one. Livermore is collaborating with the National Cancer Institute. There are 3 programs going on here. One is to look at, there's actually 2 machine learning projects and then a molecular dynamics project. So one of the things the molecular dynamics is looking at is RAS proteins normally will turn on and turn off. These RAS proteins generate other proteins. And when they malfunction or go bad, they just don't turn off and they keep producing proteins, which leads to something like 30% of the tumors, right? And people don't understand why they do this yet or how to shut them down. So they're trying to do simulations of the RAS protein using molecular dynamics inside the cell membrane to see how that interacts with different drugs in the environment in order to control it through different pharmaceuticals. So that's one effort. There's a second effort, which is looking at, you can kind of think of it as, or at least I think of it, as almost like a Netflix movie recommendation system where you have a set of known tumors, maybe like 60 tumors, and maybe thousands of drugs, and you kind of know how each drug interacts with different tumors, and what you want to be able to do is predict for a new drug, how is it going to interact with the new tumors, right? So this is very similar, I think, to sort of the Netflix movie recommendation scheme. Finally, a third project is, again, using machine learning in which they have records from a number of different cancer patients, and they're doing massive data mining on this, looking at how the patient's medical history, their environment, their diet, the microbes that live on their skin, all kinds of environmental factors might play a role in their cancer, and also the effective treatments for those patients, right? So Dr. Panda earlier was talking about MPI being customized for your application. This is a case where they're trying to customize the medical treatment for the cancer patient by looking at their history. Right? So again, all of this work, this is all brand new stuff. It's going to take time to figure this out, but it's all being driven under the covers by MVAPICH. And finally, asteroid deflection. So this is probably the coolest one I came across. So there are these near Earth asteroids, right? And they're on orbits. They're hard to see, first of all. They can be small, so they're dim to pick up with a telescope. But if you can detect one that's on a collision trajectory with Earth, and you can see it far enough into the future, you can have a chance to prevent it, right? So in this case, what they're looking at doing is for smaller asteroids, sort of on the order of a couple hundred meters across, you can launch a spacecraft at it and basically just ram the spacecraft into it and modify its orbit so that it just misses Earth, right? So you need enough time to be able to do this, but it's possible. And so there's a simulation group going on right now at Livermore who's doing the simulation of what properties of the asteroid make that impact successful, right? What makes it difficult, what makes it hard. The really neat thing about this, I think, is that it's possible in 2020, so that same group at Livermore, they're teamed up with a group at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and they're proposing this project called DART, where they'll actually run this experimentally, right? So they've got an asteroid pair called Didymos. There's one larger asteroid and a smaller one that sort of orbits around it. And in 2020, the plan is to actually launch a spacecraft and hit the smaller one and then observe how the orbit changes, right? So I really hope that goes forward. I don't think it's been approved yet, but I think that's really neat, right? And that would be all over the news. And again, all the simulation work for this is being done on MVAPICH. So there's a neat video that I've got down here in this YouTube link. If you have time, you can go check that out. Please wait until after my talk. But I was going to show it in the talk, but I don't have any time. But anyway, so the point I'm trying to make here is that this is really just a small sliver of science that's going on at Livermore, right? I don't know if this is 1/10 or 1/20th, but this is some small sampling of the science that's being done at Livermore. Already, this science is changing the world in profound ways. Livermore is but one institution of the like 2,800 or something that use MVAPICH, right? So you multiply this by the number of researchers at Livermore times the number of labs and organizations that are using MVAPICH, and the broad scale of impact that you have by working on MVAPICH is really just mind-boggling, right? So I think for the MVAPICH developers and researchers, you guys should be so proud to work on this project. It's really awe-inspiring work that you do. None of this science would be able to go on without it. So with that, let me transition into what's next at Livermore. We've got a bunch of systems coming in that we call the commodity technology systems. We have ordered so far about 6,600 nodes. And there's more to come. These are all running Intel OmniPath as the network, so it's a PSM2 network. We have selected MVAPICH 2 as the default MPI right now. So what that means is that we are committed to MVAPICH, at least for another 5 or 6 years, however long these machines run at minimum. Although we will say, like, we've also got OpenMPI and Intel MPI on the system, and so there's some competition. Most of the codes so far are using MVAPICH 2, running faster with MVAPICH 2, so they're happy with it. A couple have found maybe Intel or OpenMPI in different cases are quicker. But and PSM2 is a big concern for us because of this. The other big system that we've got coming in is Coral. So this is a slide on Coral, which we call Sierra. Oak Ridge also has one that they call Summit. This will be, it's built by IBM. It's a Power 9 processor. We've got a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs on here, right, and the Mellanox interconnect. This is really, for Livermore, this is a big shift, right? So as I said before, all of our systems, except for the Viz systems, were just CPU. The Viz systems had some GPUs on them. We are now moving into the realm where we will be GPU dependent. So all of our codes are actively porting to GPUs as we speak, right? So this is a picture of our Coral EA system. So they give us some early access systems that we're running. There's a bunch of GPUs in there. And as I said, our code teams are busy porting over, our tools teams, the MPI teams, everybody's making a massive effort to move the codes over. I expect that once they go through this effort, we probably won't look back, right? Because so far the indication is that we're getting good speed up from running on the GPUs. And so once you've done the work and you're getting good results from it, we'll probably buy a bunch of other systems, future systems with GPUs, I would think. Right, so what's that mean? Well, it means that we need more parallelism, more fine-grained parallelism. So one of the ways that we're trying to do that at Livermore is a technology called Raja. So this is a thing that's developed in-house. A lot of our codes have lots of tight loops that sort of look like this, right? It might have tens of thousands of these tight loops across the application. And so really what people are trying to do is come up with a scheme where they can parallelize the fine-grained operations within that loop. Some of our codes maybe used to just run pure MPI. Another good portion would use OpenMP, right? So you would see OpenMP pragmas here. And of course, you can parallelize these loops by adding different pragmas to run on different architectures, KNL, or you could rewrite this as a CUDA kernel. But then you start to really clutter your code. And so what Raja is trying to do is provide an abstraction for that for loop so that with minimal effort, somebody can go back in and modify their code using C++ abstractions to sort of hide away the parts that are machine specific. They're trying to make it so that the body of the loop looks pretty much like it always did. You just change how you sort of iterate the loop and define the parameters on the loop, right? And so there's execution patterns and policies. I won't go into all these details here, but index sets kind of refer how you iterate through the loop. Portable reduction types, right? So if you're trying to do a minimum reduction or a sum or something, the way you do that on And GPU is going to be different than how you do that on a processor or something, or a CPU. So we're having good results with this so far. These are some older results from 2015 that I pulled out of a paper. So these are a couple of years old, but even then, they were getting performance on par or better than the handwritten stuff, right? So in all these graphs, the green line on the left is the sort of the baseline handwritten, and the blue and the yellow are the Raja implementations. And so the goal of this work is not necessarily to always beat the handwritten, but it's to provide something that gives you as good as the hand tune optimized, but runs portably across all the different architectures, right? So the application doesn't have to change all their loops again. They just have to change the header file and define these index sets and execution policies for the different architecture they're on. The bottom right, at this time, this was on the GPUs, and so this is the one case where Raja was not doing so good. I think that's now been remedied. The problem there was that they were having trouble getting Lambda functions. Raja uses a lot of Lambda functions in C++, and they were having trouble getting Lambda functions and NVCC to work together well, but I think that's been fixed. So that's one technique. This is another technique that's not really aimed directly at GPUs, but I just thought this was really interesting when I was doing research. So this is a multi-grid approach. Normally in a multi-grid application, you sort of slice up your space into domains, and that you'll have a very fine level resolution, and then you'll have another coarsening of that's higher level resolution, or lower, I guess. And then you might have several levels of that, right? And so you can solve the coarse resolution problem in a much quicker time, and then you feed that information down to the higher resolution case, and that helps that case sort of converge to the right answer quicker. And people have been doing that across space for a long time. This project now is looking at one other dimension to parallelize in, which is the time dimension of your simulation. So now you can go coarse in space and time, solve that problem, and feed that back down to the fine-grained simulation. And so they're adding a whole other dimension to the parallelization here, literally. Okay, so we're also in deep learning, so this is also some recent work that I want to talk about. In this case, it's about how we're applying HPC to deep learning. So we have a project at Livermore called, well, we refer to it as LBAN, but it stands for Livermore Big Artificial Neural Network, right? This, from the beginning, has been an MPI-based framework for training deep neural networks. The other, I guess, thing that distinguishes it from a lot of the other frameworks out there is that from the beginning, it's meant to be model parallel. So it takes your model and it splits it across a set of nodes, right, using a distributed linear algebra library called Elemental. And so all your matrix multiplies are actually distributed matrix multiplies, or they can be. They don't have to be. But in the same framework, you can run model parallel with data parallel. So you can replicate that model several times, and then run your normal data parallel optimization there, where you're doing all reduces across the different instances of the model. And a final thing that's in there is that you can actually create different models in those instances, and then they have ways to either explore the hyperparameter space in parallel that way, or there's even a tournament style where you can compare two different models. They'll train for some time, and then they swap parameters and then compare, and then the winning model takes over from that point. So it's kind of like a winner-take-all tournament style, right? So some interesting stuff going on there. It's built to run both on CPUs and GPUs, and it has a bunch of parallel I/O in it. There's two ways that you can use the I/O. One is if you have node local storage. It's fine to just load your data set up on the node local storage. It handles that just fine. But the other aspect of it is that it can read from Lustre in a way that's not going to totally wreck your Lustre file system. So it basically has a bunch of parallel readers that will read different mini batches, and then when that mini batch is ready, it will broadcast the data out from that reader to everybody else, right? And so this can be done asynchronously. It's not yet, but it's a more organized way to sort of read the data from the file system. Yeah. The NVRAM, this is just an SSD. So, yeah. we generally refer to even our SSDs as NVRAM. Oh yeah, I should mention. Let me back up here too. All these slides, I'm trying to put links on here for people, so you can go back and look up more information if you're curious. I'm a little more familiar with this project. Some of the other projects I'm covering, I know about as much as you do, but there's plenty of more information you can go get here. It also will give you contacts if you want to talk to somebody who's working on one of these projects. Okay, so this is LBN performance. So this, I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but basically this upper right graph is showing the strong scaling as you increase the number of nodes using model parallelism, right? So this is, you've distributed your matrix across a set of nodes, you're doing the matrix multiply, and as you add more nodes, that gets faster, right? So in this case, what they're doing is an autoencoder where they vary the number of neurons that are being trained. Let's see. Okay, so that was applying HPC to deep learning. We're also going the other way, where we're looking at applying deep learning to HPC. So we have one project in which we are logging all of the job logs on the system. So these are the job scripts that the user submits, the environment that the user has when they're running. In some cases, we're even able to get access to the input decks, basically the input file that tells their simulation what to do. We're then running deep learning on top of that. So we have the job script like this. One of the things we're looking at is basically sort of treating that like an image and running convolutional nets on top of it, and then trying to predict things like runtime and I/O and network and power that the job is using, because we're also recording those values, right? So we can treat this as a big supervised learning problem, and then make predictions on runtime. So this is done by a student at the University of Delaware, Mike Wyatt, and then one of the things we would like to do with this is if you can make a good job predicting the runtime, you can then provide that to your scheduler to do a better job of like backfilling, right, and getting better utilization on the system. As far as recording or predicting I/O and power, we would like to use that so that we can actually schedule those things, right? So in the case where you're sort of power constrained by your system, you want to make sure that the jobs you're assigning don't oversubscribe the system for the power usage it has. And so one way to detect that is to make predictions based on the jobs. There's a second case here. So everybody in the valley is working on self-driving cars. We're working on self-driving codes, right? So applications that kind of steer themselves and recognize when they're going bad. So this is arbitrary Lagrangian Eulerian simulations. So these simulate like turbulent fluids, and there's a mesh that's overlaid on top of this fluid. And as the material moves around, the mesh kind of twists up and it can get tangled. And if it gets tangled too much, the application crashes. Right, and so what happens right now is when that occurs, somebody has to go back, restart the application from some saved checkpoint, tweak some settings so that when it runs forward again, it does a better job and goes on, right? And so that's an expensive process because you've got a human in the loop who has to constantly babysit these jobs as they run. We want to see if we can use things like reinforcement learning to take the human out of the loop here, right? So the machine learning problem or machine learning inference would sort of look at the data that the output or the simulation is outputting as it's running, which is what the human does already. Make predictions on where, for example, it needs to relax this mesh, and then do that automatically. The ultimate goal is to do this on the fly so that the simulation never crashes. Right? We would like to get to that point. So this is brand new research. This is actually done by a Buckeye too, so this is cool. Okay, so. And then let me end. I always, I like to end with different requests we have for MVAPICH going forward. And so let me get into that. So this one, I think, based on the talk this morning from Dr. Panda, is that this seems to already be taken care of. The main request here is we've got these 3 white lines, and we want to fill those in, right? So we would like MVAPICH to at least be an option on our Coral systems, which means that we want it to run on Power 9 and Mellanox and NVIDIA and get all that to work. But I'm optimistic that that can be done based on what I've heard already. This is another problem, right? So this is a set of machines we would like to have MVAPICH on. This is kind of what it looks like when you configure MVAPICH, because we have a bunch of different networks, and so each network has a different configuration we have to deal with, right? And so this is just from a management perspective, it's just kind of a pain to keep track of, because we have to like build an RPM for every one of these colors, right? And then make sure that we install the right RPM on the right machine and get all that straight. And that's if you're just doing dynamic linking. If a user links statically to the library, then their executable won't port from system to system, so they have to then remember this chart and make sure they link with the right library for each system. Or if you're using something like SPAC, that's kind of a pain too. And so it would be nice, I don't know if it's possible or not, but it would be nice if MVAPICH could sort of dynamically detect the underlying network and pick the right communication module for that. That would save us a lot of time. That's kind of a throwback to the very first talk I gave at Mug. This came up too. I know it's a hard problem, but this came up too. And you can see the effect of it is that the number of MPI builds you have to do just greatly explodes by this network factor down here, right? So this is a multiplicative factor that, compared to OpenMPI, we have maybe 18 builds for MVAPICH. The same MVAPICH, the builds of MVAPICH on the same machines would be something like 72. So this is a lot of work, right? So here's the throwback animation, because I know that was popular. But so, okay, so another thing we're looking at is this just got underway, but we have some people who are now trying to run periodic jobs on the system to measure all of the MPI libraries and the compilers that we have, right? And so, as I mentioned on the previous slide, there might be like something of 72 combinations. They probably won't do that many, but they've gotten a start. And what they're trying to do is identify, which libraries work well when for the different operations. So they're running a bunch of different benchmarks and comparing the libraries head to head. And so as you can see, MVAPICH basically wins out all the time. It's either as good as or better than everything else so far, except they've seen a couple of cases on RMA puts. They tell me that things are slow, so I'll try to get more details on that. But in general, I think it's good for the MVAPICH project, for the community as a whole, if we can, whenever you see these performance lags, to feed that back to the MVAPICH team, right? So I would really like MVAPICH to just have check marks all the way down the board here. But this was MVAPICH 2.2. I think they mentioned it was like a largish RMA, like a 32K byte, but I don't have any more details, so I'll try to get that. Okay, and then just a couple more slides here. So I asked our HPC application teams what they need from MPI, and this is basically the list that I got, or I have deduced over time. So I'm getting a lot of requests for thread multiple, either people asking whether it's supported or just actually using it, right? So I know that it works. People are using it. We just want to make sure that we keep performance up there and try to avoid unnecessary locking and that kind of thing. And I know also that it's, at least at Livermore, it's not as heavily tested a code path, and so there could be more bugs there. Another one is non-blocking collectives. So we actually have a lot of people that are interested in those and that are using them now. People would like to do network offload wherever possible. They really actually want to be able to get overlap with their computation and communication. They've written their apps that way, and a lot of the libraries so far haven't been able to actually provide you any overlap, so they don't get any benefit from going through all that work. But a lot of the new hardware coming and the new network hardware supports a lot of this, so we should get better performance. And we have a lot of latency bound applications, and so just pure point-to-point latency is a concern. I asked the same question to the people working on deep learning, and I got this list. So they mentioned that one of the things they would like is better algorithms for user-defined all reduces, right? So in the case of L-band, one of the things they have in there is the support for the quantized weight updates, right? So they basically, this is from a Microsoft paper, but you compute sort of the average update threshold, and then for every weight, you reduce that to a bit in the extreme case. So rather than, say, send around 32 bits for every weight, you send 1 bit, right? And but in order for that to work, you have to have user-defined data types. And so when they tried to plug that into the normal all reduce, it falls back to like a recursive doubling algorithm and didn't give them great performance. So of course, large message bandwidth is important. They would also like non-blocking collectives and point-to-point, background, again, because what they want to do is overlap the computation with the back propagation step. I think actually this is the next one about the higher precision for accumulate. No one specifically requested that, but I just thought it was interesting. You know, a lot of these deep learning training programs, you can program or train them on lower resolution data, like 16-bit half precision data, right? But when you do your accumulate, you might need to accumulate that with higher precision to keep all the bits. And so it might be interesting to have a mode where you can operate on 16-bit data, but do your all reduce on 32-bit data and sort of have that all hidden behind the all reduce, you know, maybe through an MPI hit or something. And the final one here is people would like to use MPI collectives instead of nickel, right? So if we could get the same performance out of MPI, that would be a more portable way to do it. So with that, let me just say thank you one more time to the MVAPICH team and to the newly proclaimed NowLab Nutcrackers.